General aviation aircraft are among the safest and most reliable forms of transportation in the world. But like any machine, failures can happen. Your training is designed to introduce you to a variety of simulated systems and equipment malfunctions and give you the tools to cope with that rare occasion when a malfunction occurs. During your practical test, the examiner gives you up to 3 simulated systems and equipment malfunctions to test how you analyze the situation and to see if you take the appropriate action to resolve the problem. The list of possible systems and equipment malfunctions varies from a partial or complete engine failure to smoke or fire in the engine compartment. Typically, procedures for emergency situations can be found in your POH or AFM. However, it is impossible to cover every failure or malfunction. If your POH or AFM does not have procedures for a specific emergency, such as an asymmetrical flap extension, you must rely on previous experience, good judgment, and a knowledge of the manufacturer's published emergency procedures to form an appropriate plan of action. Remember, as in any emergency situation, your first priority is to fly the aircraft. You must remain calm, clearly assess the emergency, then respond quickly and accurately to fix the problem. While many emergency checklists are committed to memory because your response must be instantaneous, other situations are less critical. In this case, you have time to refer to the POH or AFM to determine the appropriate course of action. An example of an emergency that is typically not covered in a POH or AFM is the partial loss of engine power. The partial loss of power could be the result of any number of factors, including a mechanical breakage or stoppage of the throttle control, or even undetected ice. Depending on the degree of power loss and to what extent the performance of the aircraft has been compromised, you may have several different options regarding your course of action. If your aircraft is capable of maintaining altitude or climbing, you can continue your flight to the nearest suitable airport while monitoring engine instruments and looking out for an emergency landing site should the need arise. You should maintain at least best glide speed while you attempt to restore full power to the engine. This may include applying carburetor heat, readjusting the mixture, checking the fuel selector switch, checking the magneto switch, and making sure the primer is in and locked. If you are unable to restore power, continue flying until you reach a suitable landing site. If your performance is severely diminished, you may have no other choice than to execute an off-airport landing. You should follow the emergency landing checklist outlined in your aircraft POH. It's a good idea to discuss emergency procedures for a variety of possible situations with your flight instructor. Your instructor can help you develop guidelines for systems and equipment malfunctions that are not covered in your AFM or POH. Reviewing emergency procedures on a regular basis and repeated practice with your flight instructor will also help prepare you for a real system malfunction or failure. In the unlikely event of a systems or equipment malfunction, your preparation can be the difference between confusion and a favorable outcome.
Engine failures in today's general aviation airplanes are extremely unlikely. Chances are you will never have to perform an emergency approach and landing, but you should always be prepared for an unexpected emergency. Let's take a look at how you can do this. The Emergency Procedures section in the Pilot's Operating Handbook is your official source of information on how to handle an emergency. You need to review the emergency procedures in the POH often enough to ensure that they come to mind quickly. For an extra margin of safety, you should always practice emergency approach and landing procedures with an instructor. Remember that emergency approach and landing procedures may vary slightly between different airplanes, so you should consult the POH for the airplane you fly. Now, let's take a look at some general emergency approach and landing procedures. The first thing to do, if you sense a loss of engine power, is establish the best glide speed. This speed can be found in the POH. If you fly at the best glide speed, you will minimize altitude loss, giving you more time to deal with the emergency. Flying at any speed faster or slower than best glide will result in a greater rate of descent. To help maintain the best glide speed, use the trim to relieve control pressures. The next step is to locate a suitable landing spot. If an airport is not located close by, look for an open pasture, sod farm, or hard-packed dirt field. Some roads make good landing spots. However, be aware of hazards such as cars and power lines. Avoid fields that are plowed or have ditches and other obstructions. You should also take the wind direction and speed into consideration when choosing a landing spot. A shorter field with a strong headwind may be a better choice than a longer field that has a crosswind or tailwind. After you have selected a good landing spot, go ahead and make a turn toward it. Make sure the spot you've selected is close enough to glide to comfortably. It's better to circle over your selected site if you need to lose altitude. This will also aid you in picking out any obstacles such as potholes, power lines, or ditches. If you have time while gliding down to your landing spot, you should attempt to figure out what's wrong with the engine. In case ice has formed in the carburetor, pull the carburetor heat to the on position. Verify that the fuel selector is in the both position. Adjust the mixture. Make sure the ignition switch is in the both position and check the primer to verify it is in and locked. If the engine doesn't start, continue with your emergency approach. If you have time after an attempted restart, try to notify someone of your emergency. Set your transponder to 7700. If you are in contact with ATC, call on the currently assigned frequency and advise them of your situation. If not in contact with ATC, make a radio call on 121.5.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. 52241, Cessna 172, engine failure. Forced landing 5 miles southeast of Kiowa, one on board.
If possible, try to set up your emergency approach just like a normal approach with downwind, base, and final legs. Your downwind position should be about 180 degrees from where you want to touch down. Once you are assured of making your selected landing site, begin to secure the airplane to reduce the risk of fire. Cut the fuel to the engine by bringing the mixture to idle cutoff. Turn the fuel selector to the off position. Then turn the ignition switch off. Lower the flaps as required. And then turn the master switch off. Unlatch the doors prior to touchdown to make it easier to exit the airplane if it is damaged during the landing. In a real emergency, be prepared to touch down on a surface that is much rougher than what you're used to. Hold back pressure on the yoke to lower the nose wheel slowly. This will reduce the chance of the airplane flipping over if the surface is soft. Apply the brakes as needed. On a short field, you may need to apply the brakes heavily. Practice emergency approaches will typically end by going around once you are assured of making the selected landing spot. Try and make your practice approaches as realistic as possible. Look for a spot that you could really land on and concentrate on making a good approach. Being prepared is the best line of defense in an emergency situation. An emergency approach and landing is a skill you may never have to use, but it sure pays to know how to do it well.